Greetings of the day to all the learners of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University as a part of your MBA course in semester 1, that is Managerial Communication. Today we shall be talking about various perspectives in communication. Now first let us understand what is the meaning of the word perspective. Perspective basically means ideas, views or ways of thinking, and these sometimes affect the way communication happens. Perspective actually focuses on the way in which shared meanings and practices are constituted through language and symbols, how messages get constructed and how they get disseminated. Sometimes what happens is people have fixed ideas about communicator which actually affects whatever is spoken. So therefore perspective is actually your viewpoint about a person, about a group or about the argument or the talk which happens. Communication perspective focuses on the way in which shared meanings and practices are constituted. So it is basically to understand ideas, viewpoints and fixed ways of thinking is what is your communication perspective. Several perspectives are there in communication. So in today's session we shall discuss the prominent perspectives which are there, under which the first one is visual perception. Visual perception is basically the ability of a person to see and interpret the message, that is the ability to analyze and give meaning to the message which is there. And also the surroundings which are around us, that also has got an impact on our visual perception. So the process of taking into account one's environment which is there around, so that meaning can be drawn about the message, is what is visual perception. Visual perceptual skills actually involve the ability of a person to organize and interpret the information that is seen around and give meaning to that particular information which is there. For example, you can have various components which can be there in visual perception. One component can be called as visual discrimination, the ability to notice differences which are there. For example, if I am placing different bottles of different sizes, say 100 ml, 50 ml, 75 ml, am I having the ability to differentiate in the sizes, shapes, colors and the other dimensional aspects of that particular bottle that communicate something? Say when a marketer is trying to advertise a product and say that, you know, 50 ml water is coming to you for 10 rupees, for example, then that particular 10 rupees is connecting me with the 50 ml. So what happens? I am trying to visually discriminate depending upon the size of that particular product which is there. So that brings about a perspective in communication where I am trying to understand depending upon the shape of that water bottle. Similarly, they use different types of colors when brands are actually sending messages to the consumers through use of colors. That also communicates something. Brightness denoted by color red, peace denoted by white, prosperity through green. So when different colors are being used by the companies in their logos and in their symbols, all of that is trying to communicate something to the receivers or the people who are around in the world. So that visual discrimination can come where you have the ability to notice the detailed differences in terms of shape, size and color or any other dimensional aspect of the product which is there, or dimensional aspects of what is being the content of the message. That is one, visual perception. Second component in visual perception is form constancy or form discrimination. The ability to perceive positional aspect, in what position that particular figure or the content or the object is. Different positions have got different message which it conveys. If you are placing a particular product, if for example in a retail store if you go, the products are being placed in shelves. So how are the shelves designed depending upon the design of the product? That brings about, you know, perception. The positioning of the product, in what way is the product placed, what is the position. For example, in a retail store, when you walk in, whatever are the fast selling products which are there, they actually place the product immediately at your eyesight so that your eyesight reaches. And all the products which are slow selling, those can be sold above the average height of a human being, where the rack is above your height or the rack is below the knees, so that, you know, your eyes actually don't reach there very easily. So the slow moving products are being placed there. So placing the product in a retail store in a particular shelf actually is conveying a meaning of positional aspect, which brings about a perception in the communicator, where they are trying to communicate because of the positional aspect and the differences which come about because of that. Then you also have a perception, visual perception in terms of spaces, the ability to recognize objects in different space which is there. So what is placed near, what is placed far, depending on that also you have the ability to perceive certain things and understand certain things which can be there. Similarly, the ability of visual sequencing, that is, which object is shown first, which object is shown later, that has got a meaning in what is being trying to communicate. Say when a speaker is trying to tell something, there is a flow of information, so you introduce something and then the sequencing of other things come later. Similarly, when you see an ad, for an example, the particular context in which the ad is being shown, you have a story which is being shown first and then later the product is being shown. So there is a visual sequencing so that the receiver of that particular message is able to understand the sequence and then understand what is the message which is being sent. Similarly, memory, the ability to remember letters, forms, words, sequences and recognize them very quickly when we see it again. That also brings about a clarity in perception. So these are all the components which are there in the visual perception. The ability to notice differences in shape, size, color, positioning of the product, spaces which are there, closeness or farness of a particular product, in what way you have sequenced, and what kind of an ability is there to remember the forms, shape, size of that particular product. For example, you talk about, you know, signs which are there, traffic signal. For example, if you are passing by through a school or a hospital, there you would have a no horn zone, and then they would put a signal there. There is a public sign there saying that no honking. So that is actually a mark which is conveying some meaning to you. So that the meaning is being conveyed, that zone is no horn zone. So the meaning is conveyed through a public sign which happens. Similarly, all types of traffic signals which are there. That's the simplest example of a public sign which we can take for understanding visual perception. Similarly, symbols which are there, visual symbols. Say we use emblems for nations when we are talking about national documents and all which are being made, or we talk about, you know, companies which are using their signs, logos, symbols which are there. All of that denote something to the people there. So there are certain messages which are being assigned to the visual symbols which are related to the companies also. Similarly, in communication, people also end up using all types of charts, graphs, maps, tables when they have data with them. So depending upon the type of data that you have, a person who is speaking, they may use different types of graphs and charts like a bar chart. For example, when I am talking about, you know, interest rate of a bank, I may tell my students about bank interest rate for past 15 years by showing them a trend line. So I am using a trend diagram there. Or if I want to make a comparison of different periods, say 5 years at once and next 5 years and then next couple of 5 years, then I can use a bar diagram and then I can show it to the students. So what happens there? The visual perception comes through the graph and the chart which is being depicted through the communication process. Similarly, maps which are being used, maps basically are all, you know, portable and easily carried, so you have a clarity about where you are moving because they represent a place vividly. Today we are understanding places and distances through maps which are online. Most popularly we use Google Maps in order to know where we are going. So that's a means of understanding and trying to communicate, you know, forms of visual perception which are there. This is one part of the perspective which is there in in communication, which is your visual perception, the perception which is formed about what is being communicated on account of what is being seen. That is your visual perception. The second perspective in communication is language. Language is actually natural to all humans. All humans learn language. It is instinctive also. During childhood, we all learn language. We pick up rules of grammar also. As a child, though they may not know, but as they are listening to others around them, they also pick up rules of language. Say, for example, a small child, how would he know that he has to use the word he or she for a male gender and a female gender? Because they are seeing people around and then they pick up the rules of grammar also. So language, basically the acquisition works out through grammar and linguistic rules that the people are expected to follow, and in case of use of incorrect words, unfamiliar language, a lack of detailed understanding of a language, all that will become a barrier as such. So language perspective also becomes very essential, which can be there. Under language perspective, first thing that people have to remember is active listening. Active listening, whatever may be the language which can be used, for communication perspective to become successful in terms of language, the receiver should be an active listener. And then the speaker should use different features of a language, such as adjectives. If I am using a noun, then what all are the qualities of a noun, I got to describe that so that the listener is instantly able to connect with what I am trying to explain. So use of adjectives should be there in the speech. Then use of quantity, supporting all the arguments with numbers, that also brings about or enhances the communication which is there. Using interrogative language, where I am trying to question and bring out the attention span of, or expand the attention span of the listeners by putting interrogative sentences throughout my language which is there. Then all kinds of similes which can be used. Simile basically is a feature where you are trying to compare two things, and then when I am using all types of similes, that can also enhance my communication. Using metaphors. A metaphor basically is, a tool in a language where you are describing an object, a person or a noun differently by comparing it to something else. Or you can also use emotions which can be there. For example, in a class, when I am talking about a small thing, if I am speaking something very minimal, then I can make use of an example of a mosquito, which is also very small. So therefore there I am trying to bring about a comparison of something being very small by using the simile of a mosquito there. So that way what happens, the listener also will know that something which is being spoken is of something which is very small there. So in language, adjectives being used, quantity being used, interrogative sentences being used, metaphors and similes which are being used, that brings about a perspective in communication. Similarly, in language, you also have to understand as a speaker the morphology of language, how words are formed. Morphology basically is internal structure of how words are being formed. The smallest element in the language actually is capable of connecting with the people to a largest extent. So what kind of suffixes and prefixes am I using? How meaning of a word gets altered when a suffix or a prefix is used along with the word, that basically is called as morphology. For example, if I am using the word glance and then I say glanced, then I am adding ed there. So that way my language changes and the morphology of the language changes there. So that way I am trying to understand in what way the language becomes a perspective in terms of morphology. Similarly, syntax, where you are talking about creating meaningful pronunciations, pronouncements to the language which is there, which further becomes phrases, and then that becomes set of rules and clauses. Phonetics, which we basically call a study of categorization, the speech, the words and the sounds of the words which become essential, where the person will have to stress, give pauses, where the person will have to put more pressure on the words. All that is a part of the language, which is also one of the essential perspectives which we use in communication. So first one is your visual perception, to do with things which we see around. The second one is language, where we are talking about what are the words spoken and how those words are being spoken. The third one is past experiences. letting our past experiences also will stop our understanding of what is being communicated now. If we allow our past experiences, could be positive or negative, to overtake what is being communicated in the present, then the communication may not be effective as such. Sometimes, for example, to motivate somebody, you can make use of the past experiences. For instance, a manager may be having a past experience where his sales team is able to surpass the performance levels. So they were asked to sell products worth 3 crores, but they have sold 5 crores. So in that particular situation, as a manager, when I am trying to set target for my next performance, then I can take clues from the past experiences and then enhance the positivity in my team and then communicate to them in a positive manner that way. Sometimes negative past experiences will also stifle communication. It can alter and it can make the communication, it can actually miscommunicate when you are allowing your past negative experiences to come into picture. You may enter into a situation, into a meeting or into a conversation with certain expectations depending upon what has happened in the past. So that way past experiences also is a perspective in the communication which has to be kept in mind when person is trying to communicate. Similarly, prejudices. Prejudices occur when we take isolated experiences and then conclude that the same thing is going to be followed now as well. So that way one type of an fixed ideas. In simple words, to understand a prejudice is nothing but a fixed idea. Say for example, if a student is sitting in a class with a fixed idea that he will not be able to understand anything, then that student is actually proceeding with that particular idea and saying that he will not be able to understand. So that fixed idea will stop him from active listening in the class, which actually is a prejudice. Not all prejudices are actually negative characteristics, but prejudices sometimes can be on account of cultural differences, on account of personal differences. For example, we assume women at workplace are like this, or we assume young people at workplace are not seriously working, or we assume that seniors in the workplace are very rigid, or we assume that working mothers are not able to balance their work and life, or we assume that supervisors at workplace are having a mental attitude which is rigid. So that way what happens, all these are all fixed ideas or notations in our mind which will not allow us to understand communication well. So that way you would have all these problems with the prejudices because they will start influencing how and to whom we are trying to communicate. That is also a perspective which is there in communication. Then you have the next one is feelings. Our feelings and emotions, lack of interest or trust when the person is trying to communicate actually influences the way we understand something. The first thing to tell about feelings, for example, how are you feeling on a particular day when you are trying to communicate? Say as a teacher, when I enter into a class, how do I feel on that day? As a student, how is the student feeling? That will actually enhance or hamper the entire communication process. Since we are all human beings, we are all influenced by how we feel on a particular day, what kind of a mood we are into, what kind of an emotions are we going through on that particular day. That will help us to experience easy communication or bring about difficulty in the communication which can happen. Say if I am coming to a class with a stomach pain or a ear pain, then that hampers the entire communication process. Similarly, when people come to workplaces, say an employee is coming to a workplace after having a fight with spouse at home, that actually spoils the entire communication. That may happen at the initial hours at workplace because those feelings, the emotion, the mood that the person is coming from was negative. That also hampers the effective communication at workplace. So feelings are very essential there. And not only how the person is feeling on a particular day, but how the person is feeling about a specific person, that is also very essential there. When you don't like somebody, then whatever they communicate also may not be liked by you. On the other hand, if you like someone, probably if they are communicating something which you may dislike, but still you will not conclude that you will dislike that communication. You may end up understanding what that person is trying to actually tell. So that way how you feel about yourself on that day, how you feel about the other person who is communicating, that also is an essential perspective in communication. Then comes the environment. the surroundings in which you are communicating, noises, disturbances which are there in the surrounding. For example, I am speaking when I am walking on the road, then that particular thing brings about a disturbance, and it's that environmental barrier which can be there. Similarly, you talk about people who are speaking to colleagues in the same way or in a different way, how you speak with your friends. So the environment is different, the social environments are different, the relationships that you have is different there. If I am speaking near a machine or I am speaking away from them, the environmental noise would be there, and then the barrier would be there. Not only the physical environment, but also the social environment also plays a role. For example, how I may talk to a stranger, I may not talk in the same way to a friend, because the social relations are different. How I may talk to a subordinate may be different from how I am speaking to my boss. Similarly, how I am going through my work day, what kind of experiences I have on that particular day, that also will impact the communication that I have. So the environment which is there, the social setup, the physical setup in which I am trying to communicate, that also is a perspective which adds to the communication which is there. These are all the general perspectives which are given, but apart from that, in literature there are a lot of research which is also being done on several perspectives on communication, where people like Anderson, right from the year 1972, they have spoken about the importance of beliefs, attitudes and values in communication, all the constructs which are related to prior experiences, motivators and demotivators in communication, the role of attention and acceptance of information while you are trying to communicate. All psychological theories basically talk about how people selectively pay attention, selectively retain what is being told, and the entire cognitive process, what happens to your mind when something is being communicated. So the cognitive process of handling information, determining how the message is being sent, understanding the physical emotional signals of the communicator which is there, all this adds to the perspectives which are there in the communication. Not only that, also to do with behavior of the sender and the receiver, that also is an essential perspective which is there. So in literature, Anderson has spoken about all this. Similarly, the basic communication model which we follow, which was given by Howland and Janis, that way back in 1959, there also we understand communication in terms of what is the message content. We identify who is the source of communication, what channel the person is used. There are some predispositional factors, situational factors which will determine how audiences are paying attention or not. Then there are also internal mediating factors which can be there in terms of emotions, perceptions, in terms of prejudices, which all play an important role in the entire process of communication. So what basically happens when we are trying to communicate is, all these perspectives play an essential role. Perspectives basically are fixed ideas, viewpoints or opinions which we have about what is being communicated, which can be categorized into different categories. We basically have perspectives in terms of what we see. So what we see, we interpret that. So those are all perspectives which are visual perception. Whatever we are seeing, how are we interpreting that? Sometimes we also say that we impress through our first look. So first expression is the best expression, we end up saying. So there we talk about how are you seeing things for the first time. That way you understand things at that point of time. Later on, that particular understanding may change, but otherwise initial understanding of anything comes at the first look, and that is nothing but the physical visual perception which is there, where you talk about what are the sizes, what are the colors, what are the shapes, in what position are they placed, what spaces they occupy, how much of attention retention capability people have got related to all these things which are being seen. And all types of public signs, symbols, charts, graphs, tables, maps, any other diagram which can be used by the speaker of that particular message in order to convey the message. That becomes an essential part of your visual perception which can be there. Similarly, language, where we say, it is a natural instinct for humans to use some language in communication, where we talk about what kind of a language are we using, what grammar rules are we following, what adjectives are we using to describe the qualities of a noun, all which we are using throughout the communication, interrogative sentences that we use so that we arouse a sense of inquiry on the part of the receiver, emotive languages which we are using, metaphors, similes, all that are perspectives which are related to the language, where we talk about the sound, the formation of sentences, choice of words by the person who is actually speaking. Similarly, past experiences, all kinds of experiences, negative or positive, which a person may have had in relation to the communicator or in relation to the context which is being spoken about, all that also has an impact on the way the person interprets and understands that particular message. Usually all kinds of past positive experiences will have a positive impact on the current understanding of a particular message, and usually all negative past experiences will hamper communication even in the present. So to the fullest potential, the communicated message may not be understood because of the negative past experiences that the person may be having. Likewise, all kinds of prejudices, the person who may be having a biased mind may not be able to understand things very neutrally, where you have prejudices which can be partly on account of culture, partly on account of personal preferences, partly on account of the social setup in which you are. All that encourages or discourages a person to understand the message in its right sense. So prejudices also play a very important role. Usually people also stereotype, where you look at somebody and say that this person is like this only, this person's communication is like this only, or the message which is sent by this person will be like this only. So that way you are trying to stereotype and have a biased, prejudiced mind, because of which communication also gets hampered. That is also an essential perspective in communication. And then the feelings, the emotions which the person is going through, that also has got an influence. How a person feels on a given day, how a person feels about a given person, how a person feels about a given topic, all that has got an impact on what is being communicated. Likewise, the physical environment in which we are, the social setup in which we are, which are a part of environment, all that also has got an importance in the entire process of communication. So these were all the perspectives which are there in communication process, where we are saying that perspective is nothing but a viewpoint, an idea, or a fixed way of thinking about what is being communicated. Basically, perspectives focus on the way in which we share meanings about the message which gets conveyed. Most of the time, whoever is the speaker or the communicator, whatever are the perspectives or the fixed ideas that the speaker may be having, that affects whatever is being spoken. So the perspective can be about one person, it can be about one group, or it can be about one side of an argument. So when the communication perspective comes into picture, it focuses on the way in which shared meanings are constituted through languages, symbols, and that particular message is being told or conveyed across by use of any media or across any society or any organizations which can be there. So in today's session, we have spoken about major perspectives which are there in communication, and keeping in mind all these perspectives, whether we are communicating in an organization or whether the communication happens at a personal front, all these perspectives play a very important role in order to understand the message which gets communicated. Usually most of the perspectives are to do with visual perceptions which are there, to do with language which is being used, past experiences of an individual, prejudices of a person, feelings about a particular thing, about a particular day, and the environment in which the person is there. And then through literature also, other perspectives which are related to the cognitive process of handling the information are also being talked about, which are reflected in the form of various models of communication. So perspectives in communication are an essential part of managerial communication, where managers or people in an organizational setup also can make their communication effective when all these perspectives are kept in mind. Thank you.